Oh, I should have.
Okay, people, enough with your coffee and fellowship.
Yeah, you ready? Ready? It works. Oh, and then I get. Oh yeah. The power. It's real. Sarah's gonna make it. Katie's gonna. Well, unless you want to. But I think
It's still morning. Good morning. Good morning. My name is Katie Gray Brown, and I teach philosophy and peace studies at Manchester University. And since 1970, Manchester has had a tradition of January session courses, a 3-week intersession. How many of you have been on a January travel course? All right, you know this history. And this past January, we conducted a course called Peace Building in Practice Abroad, which is designed to allow Manchester students to meet with peace builders around the world to learn about what's going on and to imagine how these models might be built into the work that we do in our lives. So this January, we were in Kenya, visiting as the guests of Angie Yoder Maina, who's a 1994 graduate of Manchester. And I wanted to introduce briefly our group: Libby Krebs, Miriam Erbal, Colleen Kaler, Cora Beasley, Josh Adler, and Sam Hupp. And they're going to share about our trip.
Good morning. It's lovely to see you all. As Katie said, my name is Libby Krebs, and I'm the current Peace Studies Coordinator for Manchester University. And I'm excited to introduce you all to Greenstring Network. This was our host organization, and this organization was founded by Angie Yoder Maina, the alumni of Manchester University. Angie has been in Kenya for about 20 years, and she is a very dynamic person with amazing energy, and she was one of those people who gets connected with lots of amazing people, and during her time in Kenya has connected with many peace builders that are well known for their community work and grassroots organizing. And during that time, started to realize there was a need for unpacking trauma as a community and what that could look like. And Greenstring Network was the passion project that came out of that. So a lot of GSN's work, we usually say GSN because Greenstring Network is a bit of a mouthful. GSN's work is around healing-centered peace building. What is that? It's kind of similar to trauma-informed work, except it's recognizing that the Western practices of trauma-informed work often do not apply or work within the complexities of the conflicts happening in different communities. And so healing-centered peace building takes that unpacking of trauma and cycles of violence and building resiliency and uses community as the center for that. And we had the privilege to experience that work in many different ways, one of which was workshops. We had 2 whole days at their offices where we worked with the very peace-building people who developed their curriculum and got to see it firsthand. They have lots of programs, so I could keep talking on, but there's 2 main ones that we learned about. One of them was Kumakucha Quest, which means it's a new dawn, and it's around creating dialogue centers for people of all ages, but a lot of their work is centered around youth and young adults. And then the second program is Healing the Uniform and taking those dialogue-centered conversations into the Kenyan National Police and prison system. And so we got to see it in in theory, in workshop, and then we got to see them in other organizations, which I will let our friends tell you a little bit more about.
So after those couple of days of workshops in Nairobi, we went sort of north. Libby helpfully included a map in the corner of the slide to Isiolo County. Isiolo is a sort of smaller town, not very different from the big city of Nairobi. It is in an area that is largely Muslim, and it is also home to a lot of rural pastoralist groups. So the organization we were visiting in Isiolo was recently renamed from Isiolo Peace Link to Regional Pastoralist Peace Link as they expand their work. So they did a lot of different work. It's kind of hard to sum it up. They were doing active work against gender-based violence. They were doing work informed by the Kenyan government's policies on women. They were doing work against terrorism, just general work with conflict between different pastoralist groups, and they were looking at resource scarcity. We got a full day of presentations and were able to ask them questions. Though they were not directly partners with GSN yet, they are currently in the process of creating that partnership. And so it was cool to see how this organization had grown along in a similar timeline to GSN and where they had ended up and how close it was to what GSN is doing. So I think the program that stuck out to me the most that they were doing was the Camel Caravan. They partnered with a local government organization, and to create conversation around water scarcity, they took people and camels from the semi-arid regions of Isiolo, and they spent 6 days walking upstream, or some years it was downstream, and talking with different groups along the river about the way they use water. In the highlands, there are a lot of agricultural farms, flower farms, and then you have a lot more nomadic life and pastoralist life downstream. And so they brought these people together to talk about this shared resource, and along the way, they hosted meals together and they planted trees. Overall, this was such a neat organization to get to experience and hear from. I was very impressed with how much they had done analyzing the work they do and the impact it was making. As far as terrorism, they had gone from having significant recruitment within the region to about, I think it was 10 to 15 years later, having no active recruiters within Isiolo. So that's Regional Pastoralist Peace Link. I'll pass it to Colleen to talk about some of the wildlife.
Yes, so these lovely photos, many of which were taken by Miriam, are from the Samburu National Reserve, which is where we got to take a safari while we were in Isiolo area. So we were in Samburu County, which is near Isiolo, and the Park of Samburu is part of a patchwork of reserves and protected land that has communities of people living throughout it who are pastoralists. And that was really interesting to learn about because aside from seeing the amazing wildlife, I think I didn't blink the entire day, we were lucky enough to meet with a ranger who was a wildlife ecologist, and she was also of the Samburu tribe. So we learned about wildlife and community conflict, and also how the park has been working with the community stakeholders to decrease that conflict and also decrease things like poaching and really create a community connection. So we were learning about, like, when she was a child, all the kids were taught as soon as they were 6, 7, 8, how you move your cattle around when you see an elephant, how you stay on the right side of the wind so they don't smell you, stuff like that, which was really, really fascinating. And then also the trust that they've built between the rangers and the communities, and how that works to prevent poaching, because they have had 0 incidents of poaching within the last 11 years, I think. And the community knows when people are suspicious, and if someone is trying to enter the park that has some bad vibes, it immediately gets reported to the wardens, and they have a special unit of wardens that investigates the potential poachers. And so that was really interesting to hear about. Another fascinating thing is, you can see from here, it's the very typical, like, dry grassland that we might see in movies as children. But what we found throughout our entire trip was how quickly the landscape changes. Just on the other side of these mountains was some of the most lush areas we were in the entire time. And we saw these amazing farms and just this amazing greenery. So it was really interesting, even though we were in a very small area, that even different parts of the park seemed very different. And they kept saying over and over how it was such a small park, but it felt very large to us. It was only about 165 square kilometers, but there was quite a few amazing species contained in there. There were the Samburu Special 5, which are 5 animals that you only see together in Samburu, which I cannot remember off the top of my head, but they're very cool. We saw elephants, giraffes, etc. And then in Nairobi, we saw Karua Forest, which we already heard about Wangari Maathai, and she played a part in protecting Karua Forest. It's in the middle of Nairobi, and it's hard to believe that it's in the middle of Nairobi when you're there because it's completely silent. You can't hear the sounds of the city. It's just such a dense forest. But when Nairobi was expanding and forests were rapidly being cut down, Wangari actually was instrumental in protecting it from developers, and there's a lot of cultural value in Karua that would have been lost had it been cut down. During the resistance, Kenyans would be jailed if they were on the roads after a certain time of day. And so they would use the forest to travel between villages to communicate that the resistance was going strong, it was still on, communicate messages. And there's actually a cave. If you can't really see it, but in the middle picture, it's to our right. And that was a place that Kenyans during the resistance would shelter if they were being tracked by the British. That we could see cave art, smoke, and the Brits couldn't follow them through these forests. I mean, if there hadn't been trails, we certainly couldn't have gone through this forest. So it was this amazing piece of Kenyan cultural history, as well as this amazing rainforest.
Okay, I'm going to talk about some art that we visited while we were in Kenya. So first I will talk about Joanne. She is an eco-artist in a space close to Nairobi, but not in Nairobi. Her space focuses on repurposing garbage into art. I brought some with me today that after our presentation, if you would like to come look at it or touch it, you are welcome to. So she has a space where children can come and play during the day and also create their own art. And then about once a week, they take a trip to a dump nearby and pick out the pieces that they want to use for their art. So this here is a photo of a Kenyan woman, but her hair and her clothing are made out of a can of beer, of a Kenyan beer. But you can feel it, you can feel the can. It's not just a photo of a can, it's a real can stitched on the canvas. Joanne was such a vibrant person, too. She was so much fun to talk to. She talked about how she moved from maybe a space where she had more luxury to this new space where she can provide a service to people and also enjoy art. The children that were there were also extremely vibrant. They showed us like a dance show, basically, where they were showing off dresses that a lot of the girls had made about trash that they had found from the nearby dump. Beautiful dresses with texture, different colors. Some would move in the sunlight, and so we got to dance with them and also see the art that they had made. And then the next place we went to is called Kazuri Bead Factory. For me personally, when we were told we were visiting the bead factory, I thought it was going to be kind of like an enclosed space with not a lot of windows, kind of like how I would picture a factory here. But it was this beautiful open air space with lots of women working there. We got to see the bead process all the way from wet clay to a necklace. The Kazuri Bead Factory it's a fair trade factory that focuses on employing single mothers and other women who may be in situations that make it difficult to find employment. So all the women that we talked to were in some sort of difficult situation and had this job now where they were being paid fairly and also got to be creative. They got to pick the shape of the beads, the color of the beads, the different glaze they wanted to use, and then design the different necklaces and bracelets. So you knew that everything that we purchased there was made by somebody who enjoyed creating it and also from somebody's own vision. While we were there as well, we also shared a dance exchange. After we got a tour of the entire factory, which was really cool, we got to go up and like even touch some of the wet clay and the beads at different stages. Then the women performed a dance for us that we also got to participate in. So we were kind of in a circle, like jamming out together, walking around, and then it turned into everybody in the middle of the circle dancing together. I also brought some beads and a little note about Kazuri, so if you'd like to come and see those after the presentation, you're welcome to. There was also one thing that I would like to mention about the dance. So we were often greeted with these wonderful dances, and we felt we had nothing to offer in return. So we reverted to the Cotton Eye Joe, and we performed the Cotton Eye Joe multiple times as our offering of a dance. So at Kazuri was, I think, the first time where we performed the Cotton Eye Joe, and it came out multiple times after that. So that was our dance exchange.
Good morning. I'm going to share with you our experience at Samba Sports. Samba Sports is an organization that partnered with Green String Network. And when we went to Kwale, Kwale is on the coast at the very bottom of Kenya. We got to study the first day at the Samba Sports office, I suppose is what you would refer to that as. And we got to learn about the projects that Samba Sports has initiated. We learned about the efforts that they have made and about the success that they have received. Samba Sports focuses around the idea of sports uniting mostly youth together through sports to give them something to do during the day. We talked a little bit about how there are terrorist recruiters who will kind of prey on youth who have nothing else to do or no other source of income. Samba Sports also offers scholarships and allows for training so that individuals can get scholarships to different universities as well. So the first day we traveled and we learned from the Samba Sports people at their office. And then the second day, we went to plant some trees there in that top right picture at a health organization. And then we went to their football pitch, their soccer pitch. And we got to interact with the individuals who have been through this Samba Sports program. We got to eat a meal with them. We got to learn from them. And what I think stuck out to me about our time at Samba Sports was that we got to see their work in action. The first day we got to sit in a circle and we got to go through the process of sort of a mediation of sorts where we basically learned from their curriculum, the Kumekucha Quest curriculum that we were learning about back in Nairobi. And then the second day we got to enjoy fun games and then group discussions with individuals from Samba Sports and people who have been through their curriculum.
So Kenya was a British protectorate through the early 1960s, and the colonial impact was very evident when we were there, specifically in how multicultural the country is. When the current lines were drawn, they were not drawn according to any ethnic boundaries, without respect for any pre-existing borders. So you have this country which is relatively small but packed with different cultural groups, and those cultural groups play a large part in politics in Kenya. So each person, each citizen of Kenya, on their ID, they will have their tribe and their clan registered. And this impacts how people vote, how people buy into businesses, and where they live. But everyone has to exist in the same space. So we were able to learn about some of this history at GSN headquarters in our first few days in Nairobi. An anecdote that we were able to hear from Angie is that when she was getting a Kenyan ID, they really needed her to list a tribe and a clan. And she insists, I do not have either of those. But they kept pressuring, persisting, and eventually she listed her tribe as Mennonite and her clan as Yoder. So this got me thinking, maybe all of us have tribes and cultural ties in the United States that we're not quite aware of in the same sense as Kenyans are. And these cultural ties in the US haven't made their way into politics like they have in Kenya, but they're definitely there. It was fascinating to see the history of Kenya through independence and into the political system that they have now. And we were able also to hear about some of the ongoing electoral issues. We had a local news channel that was on the television every morning at breakfast. And what a fascinating piece of TV. During our time in Kenya, we had several people who were speakers at GSN who came from different regions. And the different regions in Kenya, as was said before about the landscapes, but also culturally, were so diverse and different. It was a truly excellent experience in that way.
Something special happens when you travel together. You learn about yourselves. You learn a lot about the people you're traveling with. But another gift of this trip was the community that GSN provided for us. I didn't know if you wanted to share anything about the connections we made with our Kenyan counterparts.
So we were blessed to have 4 individuals who work for GSN traveling with us, but they were in our peer group. So the youngest of whom had just graduated from university in Kenya, and we connected really strongly with them because we were of similar ages and having had similar experiences, and also we traveled together. And so there's so many odd times where you're on a train or in the car and nothing is happening, so you have to turn to somebody and talk to them. And we got to have a lot of interesting conversations about the differences between Kenya, small things. For instance, single-use plastic has been banned in Kenya for a really long time. And Jeremy, who's just graduated, asked us, what does a plastic bag look like? And so many of those small moments were really important in shaping this trip. We also played Dutch Blitz with them. We taught them how to play, and it became their favorite to the point that we left the cards with them. And so those memories of community and having friends in Kenya really shaped our experience in a positive way.
Throughout the trip, one thing that was very culturally important was music, dance. We saw that everywhere we went. But what was kind of interesting was a lot of our hotels or restaurants we were eating would play kind of remixed versions of Western music, and we were like, this isn't what we want to hear. We would prefer to hear Kenyan music. So another connection that we made with our hosts was we started a shared playlist and where they could show us their favorite songs to sing and listen to. And so we started to learn those songs, the pop songs, and started to learn the words to them and really started to love them. So that was also a point of connection, was music.
Something striking in my conversations with Angie about this was one of the gifts to GSN was having their 4 young staffers meet and connect with peacemakers from the United States. And we were able to travel to places, they were accompanying us, they had never seen these parts of their own country. And they were able to meet people who were organizing in different regions that were inspiring to them as well. Something Angie said, she has a question she has posed with other groups that she has worked with at GSN, is this question of, if you think about if you had a crisis at 2 a.m. in the morning, who would you be able to call? Who are the people that you would have in your life that no matter the time, no matter the inconvenience, you could call upon? And this was a question she posed to our group, and she remarked that a striking number of people in our group had more than 1 or 2 people that they could call if they needed help. And I think it got up to, I think she was, how many did she ask? Like 10 to 15 people that the students in our group felt like they had like in their hand to call. And Angie remarked that this was something very special about Manchester's Peace Studies program, that there's an emphasis on what community looks like and how to be in community with each other, what that feels like. And she recognized that as something that GSN is also trying to do, to create an understanding of what community requires. I think part of the ability of our program to have that experience is the emphasis on trips like this, right? That we put ourselves in the position of being very uncomfortable sometimes. And we're open to that experience. And we learn from that experience. And that allows us to be together in a more significant, more meaningful way. We are opening this up for questions or comments. And there's a mic that can come around if you'd like to ask.
I want to pursue the cultural diversity. Did you perceive that the Kenyan government had programs or working on equality and justice for all the different cultural factions?
We were able to meet in Isiolo County. We were able to meet with a group of workers who are in a governmental-led program to pursue peacemaking. And they were definitely working on a lot of stuff between pastoralists and farming groups, two communities which often had conflict over resources or proceedings in a town. So these programs, these outreach programs, were focused on that, but perhaps they ignored sometimes differences in political parties based on ethnic status. So with elections, a lot of what seemed to be a candidate's basis was the tribe that they represented and how they would pursue policies that helped their people. And this, I guess, inherent bias might have impacted some things. However, the peacemaking seemed to be going well. I do wish we could have seen a bit more governmental work. I was pretty interested by the day we spent listening to their speakers. I hope this answers the question.
I'm curious about the language situation. Of course, it was a British protectorate. Does everybody know English? How much of a language barrier was there for you? And did all the different clans speak different languages? And how much of a barrier is that for Kenyans as well as for other people?
Sure. So what's really interesting in Kenya is that there are pretty much, it's really common for everybody to speak 3 different languages. English is their national language. Swahili is spoken pretty universally by everybody. And then everybody, each clan has its own unique language. What we found really, really interesting and really, really impressive was that individuals from the same clan will often fluctuate between the 3 languages that they speak, or fluctuate between Swahili and their tribal language, just quickly without notating that they were switching languages, which as a group who can speak English exclusively is very, very impressive. On our trip, I actually spent a couple conversations talking about that exact topic with one of the individuals from the Greenstring Network, and she mentioned that she was also a little worried about the disconnect between our two groups. But what we found on our trip was that they spoke English to us like excellently, and they also taught us some Swahili words while we were going through our trip. We had an informal goal of trying to learn one word per day, which worked to some extent. I'm sure that whenever we used those Swahili words, they looked at us like we were cute for trying. But yeah, there was no real disconnect between Greenstring Network and between our group or between any of the organizations or individuals that we talked to throughout our trip.
If I could add two things onto that. One, I was in conversation with, again, one of our GSN team members who was talking about Kenyans our age are finding that their parents and grandparents, due to the pressure of colonialism to assimilate, did not speak their indigenous tongue and continue not to, because that pressure still continues despite not being under occupation. And one of our friends was actually talking about how her grandmother had turned to an elder in her community and started talking in the indigenous language, and she went, "I did not know you could speak that." And so those factors still continue to play out, and you can see this passion from people our age who want to bring that back but are not sure where to start or how to have that conversation. So that was one thing that I found to be interesting. Another thing, sorry for still talking, but another thing is language is so community-based. The community that Joanne's art studio and space was in this very, very low income community. And again, one of our GSN team members, you might be sensing that we had a lot of conversations, had talked to one of the community artists, and they said that there's another new language that is emerging in that community, and they have their own type of currency and their own understanding that's outside of the broader Kenyan society. So it's interesting how they kept saying, well, there's 42 indigenous groups. Well, there's 56. Like, the number kept growing because community is such an important thing for them. There's lots of things that come out of that.
So we could talk about language a lot because I think it's such a major piece of their social life. Sort of an anecdote that was shared with us was Kikuyu is the tribe that is sort of around Nairobi, and it was the tribe that came into the most contact with the British. And so we were speaking with one of the presenters at GSN, and they were explaining that if they were to walk into an establishment and speak in Swahili or speak in English, they'd be taken one way, but Kikuyu is perceived as the language of business, and so just by speaking in Kikuyu, they would instantly be taken more seriously. Also, you ask about words, we realized we never explained it. Asante sana on the screen means thank you very much. And that was probably the term we used most throughout our time in Kenya.
For any of you that would be willing, I'd be very interested in hearing what you thought was the most significant impact that this trip had on you, and possibly how it may be shaping your future.
I can share something that maybe it wasn't the biggest impact on the whole trip. I don't know if I could narrow that down, but something that really impacted me from the beginning of the trip was on one of the first days when we were doing the rotating sessions at GSN, hearing from some really cool peacemakers and people that did peacemaking through art or like theater, but also people who were working with the National Police Service, just like a wide variety of people. During one of the presentations, there was like an interruption, and somebody had mentioned, the man presenting was named Dr. Babu, and somebody else said, while Dr. Babu was presenting, they said like, kind of interrupted and said, oh, well, this person is doing this. And he referred to them as, oh, my brother, or our brother. And I don't know, for me that really stuck out, even though it wasn't a part of the presentation, as a way that Dr. Babu is, like, we all love Dr. Babu. Josh got along with Dr. Babu really well. He was just like this super inviting, super kind person, and we all felt very welcome around him. And I don't know if I took his speaking of brother too literally, but then I thought like, wow, maybe I should start seeing people as my siblings too. And that kind of shaped for the rest of the trip how I saw the other members of our group, how I saw the people that we met, and it gave me a lot. It helped me give grace to people on days when maybe I was more irritable on the trip and getting frustrated by small things, or days when I didn't understand what was going on or things that were happening, thinking of like, well, I'm surrounded by my siblings here. Whether they're someone I just met today or somebody that came on the trip with me, they're my siblings with me. And that's something that stuck with me as I've came home too.
Ever since, like my whole life, I've always assumed that a safari is the type of thing that I don't even bother to put on a bucket list because I'd probably never get to do it. So I assumed that that would be the thing that would stick out the most, be the highlight of the trip, life-changing. I mean, it was amazing and it was great. Don't get me wrong, but absolutely the thing that I keep coming back to is the power of human connection, because we learn about how GSN connects people who have been through horrible traumas, that they've lost parents, they've lost children, they've survived murder attempts, and they are figuring out tools of how you can connect people. And then we saw it work on us. And like they got us to play these games and open up and be vulnerable and be silly and be goofy. And it just seems like there is no problem that is so great that if you don't start with a good, solid human connection, you can at least make some problem or some progress on. So that's what I keep thinking about, even though I thought it would be the Lions.
I think something that really connected with me was the discussions we had. I am so lucky to have gotten to talk with so many incredible peace builders, but also just random individuals. The thing that stuck out to me when I was on the plane ride back, I was just looking through my notebook, and I suppose I expected to learn the most when we traveled to an organization. Like when we were in our sessions at Samba Sports or in Isiolo or in Nairobi, I expected to look through those notes and be like, yes, this is what I learned. This is what's going to last with me. But I think that in reflection, what I think about the most when I remember my time in Kenya was the discussion I had with just a random guy who sat down like hours before we were about to leave, who ended up being a doctor. He was just staying in the same hotel as us, and we had a like 2-hour discussion about just about everything. I learned that it seems like the average Kenyan knows more about American politics than the average American does. He was explaining things to me about my own government, and I was like, okay, I'm learning a lot right now. We connected on the fact that he studied to be a doctor here in Indiana. He talked to me a lot about some of the concepts that we had learned over the course of the trip. And I think that kind of unexpected connection was a theme throughout the entire trip. Like we mentioned, like as we were traveling around the different areas in Kenya, we had a lot of time in the buses or on the train to talk with our 4 friends from Greenstring Network, and that's where I really learned a lot informally from some of the most wisest people I have met in my entire life.
Food. I'm a big appreciator of food. Not only was it amazing, but a meal has an amazing atmosphere to it. We were 17 visitors. I can't even think about cooking for myself, let alone for 17 other people. And everywhere we went, we either had tea, which was mixed tea with food involved, and it was a half an hour to an hour, and you were always guaranteed that deep connection and conversation. And often those were my favorite moments. And so I can never stop talking about how those meal times were often the best times that we had conversation that felt genuine, and especially at Samba Sports when we were connecting with youth and young adults, that was often when we got to get them to open up a little bit in a different way. So definitely when we ate food together was one of the most impactful times.
Everyone else has spoken about the amazing human experiences, and those were very important to me. But also, it was, I guess, an exercise in adjusting my pace of life. Over the course of the trip, I didn't realize it, how quickly I guess I was changing the way I approached a day. And by the end of the trip, it was, only about 2 weeks or a bit more. But I was in a completely different mindset in what I do to prepare for a day, not only because of the events and places we were going, but also because of the customs. I find myself preparing for morning tea and being back in classes at Manchester. I have reset my clock, but it was amazing to live in a fundamentally different way, it seemed. And I think everyone else on the trip, too, everyone was an excellent traveler, and they leaned into it. It was amazing, and it made the trip so much better than it was already.
I think one thing I keep coming back to, it is in no way the most impactful, Paul, because I could never choose, and I agree with everything that's been said, but I keep thinking about colonialism, partially because some of the classes I'm now taking this spring semester, but the ways it impacts every single part of life in Kenya is so different, because in the US, the colonializers just took over, and Kenya was colonized because they wanted a train system to get stuff from Uganda to the coast. It was not colonized by white people coming in and moving in and wanting to live off the land. And so seeing the ways it impacts every detail of these indigenous people's lives, even when there aren't a lot of white people living in Kenya, was really interesting. And I find myself coming back to the question of, why are things so different? We were both British colonies, but life here looks so different. For instance, we drink coffee all the time, and on one of our last days, there was a woman who came, and she works with women throughout Kenya to provide artisan coffee, because everywhere we stayed, we were given essentially instant coffee. Until the revolution, it was illegal for Kenyans to grow coffee. They could only grow it for colonizers to be exported before it was even roasted. And so within sort of every little bit of my day, I find myself reevaluating things based on how would life here look different, and that question of how colonialism plays out, which is perhaps by chance. There's lots of different factors, but it just looks so different.
I have three things, Paul, that come to mind. And the first is just the power of the lasting power of one good idea. In 2 weeks there, a little over 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks of travel, I met 4 people named Kennedy between the ages of 20 and 35 years old. And when I asked them about that, it was because of the Kennedy Airlift program that brought Kenyan scholars to the United States for an undergraduate. This was in the early 1960s. This was the program that brought Barack Obama's father to the United States that brought Wangari Maathai to Kansas, of all places. But 4 people named Kennedy because of one good idea. And then a second would be the importance of studying Africa. And very much aware that right now, Manchester University, probably for the first time in 100 years, does not have an Africanist or someone with significant experience in Africa. At the same time as by 2050, we learned, what will the percentage be? Like 1/4 of the world.
I think it's like 1 in 4.
By 2050, 1 in 4 people will be African, and 70% of those will be under the age of 35. Okay. We need to think about that world and being ready to meet that world, because Africa, as one of the instructors, Babu, said, Africa maybe should be one country, which was an interesting perspective for me to take. And then finally, it's the importance of the motivation that brought the development of this trip, which is a collaboration between environmental studies and peace studies. Because as we traveled through the different lands of Kenya and spoke to people about the roots of conflict there, it was clear that both of these areas are critical for bringing knowledge and perspectives and questions to the challenges that we're facing now.
I was wondering, was there any religious tension?
So Kenya is largely Christian, another aspect of colonialism. But there's also a strong Muslim population, sort of Arab along the coast. And there's not actually very much tension. There is some in certain areas, and certainly in Isiolo they were doing work, interreligious work. But along the coast, when we visited Samba, I had a really interesting conversation. Samba was founded sort of by 2 men, one who is Muslim and one who's a Christian pastor. And I was interested in, Cephas was the pastor, I was interested in his perspective on how his Christianity impacts his work in this largely Muslim region. And his answer was, well, I can't attend events on Sundays, because he was preaching at church. And he just so clearly saw the value in conversation and bringing people together, and was explaining that, for instance, sometimes maybe they use different words to talk about the same thing, but as soon as that connection was made, the community was just clearly in a similar place, even though they were coming from different religious backgrounds. And this was also just evident by the number of people in hijab versus not at Samba. You could see sort of how intercultural and interreligious this group was, and it was just so a non-starter for conversation. It was not a tension that was brought up. And what was talked about was the shared experiences and problems of living in Kwale and in this area.
Iman? Okay. In many countries that have been colonialized, where the divisions were so arbitrarily done, there's a grouping that's brought together that does not have a natural coherence. And having grown up in Nigeria, there was very definite prejudicial treatment of some groups by most other groups, or many other groups. Did you run into any of that in Kenya with such large diversity?
Yeah, so on our second day with GSN at their offices, we had kind of been working through some of our workshop material, and and they kept tossing around on words and names, and we hadn't quite like attached them, or at least for me, I had not quite attached them to their meaning. And I asked a question about one of these words, and it turned into this broader conversation about a lot of different things. But there are some groups that continue to not be represented in many ways. A good example is the Somali population in Kenya. So in fluctuation with the boundaries that have changed over colonialism, which we should also say, the colonialist power in Kenya didn't end until 1963. So they are still very early in their experience of independence. So, and that was evident in many different ways across our experience, but especially for the Somali population, which is in the northeast portion of the country, where when they were starting to have independence and they were defining borders, they said that the Somalis could not go back into what we understand as Somalia. They had to stay within Kenya. And that's a big deal. That's relocation. That's separation from community. There's a lot going on there, but there continues to be prejudice towards this community. And one of the peace builders that we were talking to, Addo, was from that community and talked about how they still experience a lot of suppression in many different ways. These IDs that Josh was talking about, and actually I think it may have been Sam were talking about. Some people could travel without carrying their IDs on them, but if you're Somali, you have to, because there's a high chance you will be asked to present it and prove who you are. We talked a lot about the census. The population census does not properly capture the demographics of Kenya for many reasons. It is taken differently than the way they do it. It's actually an interview process. They come to your home, and whoever is in your home is who is counted. And you may say that your family is one thing, and they might write you down as a different thing too. And this population, the Somali population, feels those pressures a lot. And so yes, that's a very complicated answer, where the simple answer is yes, that still does exist. And presents a lot of everyday troubles for different populations within Kenya.
An attitude that we were told might be common within some communities is Somali Kenyans are fine, but I'm wary of Somalis. And without functional governmental relations between a Somalian government and Kenya, it's really hard to draw that line for many people. And with refugees and migrants coming from the northeast Cape of Africa and the rest of Somalia, these communities that are coming in are sometimes finding themselves in disagreement with communities already there. And we learned about this in Isiolo. So this was something that that the organizations we met with in Isiolo County are currently working with, because it is a more recent wave of migration in the past 30 years. So this is something that communities are having to adapt to.
Our time is just about up. I would first like to say thank you very much for sharing with us in the way that you've shared. That has felt very authentic and true to your experience. You have about 2 minutes left, and the one question that I would just invite you to think about, and if you have a response, to go ahead and share it. As you have been living now for a little bit, having been back for a couple days, starting to get back into classes, what are the curiosities that still take up space in your heart and mind and body that have been spurred by your experience in Kenya? And then you can wrap things up.
As we've been back, I've been thinking and noticing a lot about consumerism and what we choose to throw away versus what we choose to fix or mend or just live with because it's what we have. In Kenya, like especially Joanne, everything that she was wearing she had made, and she was wearing flip-flops made of tires, and she had bracelets made of some old charging cables. And I find myself pausing of like if something is starting to break or crack, I'm like, well, actually, do I need something, or could I put some duct tape on it? It's not like I've never thought that, but it's such a difference. Like being here again, everything feels so luxurious and opulent to a point that it makes me a little bit uncomfortable. So I continue to have a lot of thoughts about that as we're back.
I think something that I've thought a lot about is the idea of practical peace building or practical peace studies. I was asked the question over 50 times at my graduation what I'm going to do with a peace studies major, and I didn't have an answer to that, and I still don't particularly have an answer to that. But I think that our time in Kenya, we got to observe and we got to study from individuals utilizing the studies. Like Angie Utermina studied at Manchester, and when we were studying the Kumakucha Quest, you could see, okay, I know what this is because I've learned from the same people that Angie has learned from. And I think that something that I've been considering a lot is why do we not have a Green String network in the United States? One of their programs is focused around police brutality in Kenya, which is also an issue there. And it was interesting that one of the things that I did not anticipate was that many of the issues that Kenyans and the Kenyan government fights against in Kenya are reflected very, very simply in the United States as well. So I think something that I've been thinking a lot about is what can we learn, what have we learned, and how can we transfer it into where we live here.
I think a lot about Kenya with food. Essentially, everything we ate there was organically farmed and locally farmed, and it is just such a different way of eating. And additionally, we had conversations about the intentionality behind cooking food and the service it is to someone else. For instance, talking about how to make rice correctly, it takes the whole day. And the gift that is to the community, because at the end of the day, you get to share that rice. And so I think a lot about it when I'm eating, because our culture is so different from that.
Something I've been thinking about is the amount of issues that Kenyans and Americans share. So many of the issues that we have in the United States were easy to see in Kenya, as if the lines were bolder or maybe a microcosm. For example, income inequality. In Kenya, we were driving through communities, and in Nairobi, the neighborhoods are just wall to wall. So we'd be driving through an area, and I'd look away, and suddenly the houses would be completely different, you know, with private driveways and everything. Another one might be ethnic relations, just easier to see in Kenya, but still existing in the United States. And being able to visualize these issues is very important, and this trip to Kenya really helped me do that.
I would say when I return, what strikes me is what a simple thing it is to expand our moral concern. Last week there was an explosion in one of the slums of Nairobi, and it was very near where we had been in Eastlands to visit with the eco artist and her students. And before this trip, I might have read that. I don't know if I would have kept up as much with news in East Africa. But now I was able to text some friends to ask how they were doing, to ask what was happening in its aftermath. It's such a simple thing, and it changes everything.
I feel like for me, I think I've been challenging and trying to expand definitions that I thought I already knew. So especially the word resilience during the time that we spent in our workshops, and then contextualizing that lived experience with the organizations we were with, that understanding of resilience, peace, and community, all three of those. I kept feeling like I had a solid understanding, and then we'd have another experience, and it would continue to expand. And so I have found myself continuing to ask myself, how can I continue to grow that?
I think I'll just echo what Sam said earlier about the change of pace in life, where it feels like every time I take a break from the way that I live in, my bubble here, then I always reevaluate a little bit my pace of life, which, maybe it's not realistic for me to live with the pace that we did in Kenya because we were kind of on vacation, but feels a little bit, I guess makes me evaluate a little bit more how I feel when I live in the pace that I live here compared to the pace that I was living for 2.5-week chunk.
Again, thank you very much for giving us a glimpse into your experience, and we do hold you in the light, and with hopes and prayers that this experience will continue to form and transform you. It does seem that you all have a bit of a glow to you. Now, I don't know if you had that glow before you went, but when you speak of your experience, there is a sense of delight that also comes through, and we do hope that that continues in you to be a source of inspiration for you. Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you for your time.
It was always a follow-up, Brian. People danced first, and then we did cotton.
If you want to dance for us, we'll show you.